Count the men who came for him. The Greek word John uses in 18:3 is speira, the technical term for a Roman cohort. A cohort in the first century was not a patrol, it was a military unit of between 480 and 600 armed soldiers, 1/10 of a legion, commanded by a tribune. Add to that the hyperetai, the temple guard sent by the chief priests, and the personal servants of the high priest carrying lanterns and clubs. Several hundred men, fully equipped, crossed the Kidron that night to arrest one unarmed teacher standing under olive trees with 11 tired companions. And when he stepped forward and spoke 2 words, every last one of them went down into the grass. Before we go any further, 3 things are going to come loose from this text. The first is how many men were actually there, and why every English translation that says a band of soldiers is technically accurate and spiritually catastrophic. The second is what he actually said in the Greek John wrote. 2 words. The same 2 words God spoke from a burning bush on the side of a mountain 15 centuries earlier. The third is the question nobody wants to ask out loud. If a single sentence put an entire Roman cohort on the ground, what exactly do we think happened a few minutes later, when he let them stand back up and tie his hands? For anyone who wants scripture read slowly, with the original language and the historical weight still attached, this is the channel for that. Subscribe. The work goes deeper from here. Now, back to the garden. It is after midnight. Passover has been eaten. The upper room is empty. He has crossed the ravine the Psalms call Kidron, the same ravine David crossed barefoot and weeping when his own son betrayed him. A detail John's first readers would have caught before the torches even appeared on the ridge. The olive press sits in the corner of the enclosure. Olives, when they are crushed, bleed oil the color of old gold, and the whole grove smells of that bruised fruit and cold stone. The 11 are nearby, most of them asleep, one of them missing. Then the light arrives. Not moonlight. Torches. John records it specifically in verse 3. Lanterns and torches and weapons. Think about what that sentence means. They brought fire to find a man in a grove. They brought a cohort to arrest a carpenter. Somebody up the chain of command was afraid of something, and whatever they were afraid of, they were not taking chances on. The clank of the segmented armor comes before the men do, that unmistakable metal-on-metal rhythm of Roman infantry moving in formation down a slope. The temple guard are with them, robes dark against the torchlight, faces half-lit. Judas is at the front. He knows exactly where to go because he has been here before, many times, quietly, at night, with the man he is about to hand over. And the man he is about to hand over is not hiding. He is standing. He is waiting. He sees them coming through the trees, and John tells us this is the sentence that breaks the whole scene open. He went out to meet them. Not fled, not froze. Walked towards 600 armed men with his hands empty and asked them a question. Before the question reaches his lips, there is a man in the front of that column who has been here before. John writes it plainly in 18:2. Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. Read that verse slowly. It is not atmosphere. It is evidence. The garden on the western slope of the Mount of Olives was not a hiding spot. It was a habit, a routine location, a place the 12 returned to after long days in the temple courts, where the air carried the sharp bite of crushed olive leaves and the ground still held the warmth of the afternoon sun into the small hours. Judas knew the path in the dark. He knew which gate, which corner of the enclosure, which stretch of low wall a man might try to slip over if he wanted to disappear into the ravine. This was not a lucky guess. This was a man using the private knowledge of 3 years of shared nights to deliver his teacher to armed men. And that changes what kind of betrayal this is. It is not impulse. Impulse does not organize a cohort. Impulse does not brief a tribune. Impulse does not negotiate the 30 pieces of silver that Matthew records in chapter 26 before the Passover meal is even served. Judas had been planning for days, maybe longer. He had been sitting across the table from the man he intended to sell, accepting bread from his hand, letting his feet be washed only hours before, calculating the route from the upper room to Gethsemane the entire time. If you have ever realized that someone close to you had been deciding against you for longer than you knew, that the betrayal was not a single moment, but a quiet architecture built while you were still calling them family, then you already understand what kind of grief is walking through these trees. The body goes back over every shared meal, looking for the hour it turned. You do not find it. The hour does not leave fingerprints. And the hardest part of John 18:2 is not what Judas knew, it is what Jesus knew. He knew the garden was being used against him. He knew Judas would come straight here. He knew exactly which familiarity was being weaponized. And he went anyway. He did not pick a different grove. He did not lead the 11 over the ridge to a place Judas had never seen. He walked into the one location on earth where his own routine had become a map drawn for his enemies, and he waited there. John Chrysostom, preaching in Antioch in the 4th century, noted that this was the deliberate choice of a man who refused to let his arrest look like an accident. He could have made them hunt. He chose instead to be easy to find. The torches are close now. Gravel shifts under Caligae. The hobnail sandals of Roman infantry leave a sound nothing else in the 1st century makes. Judas raises his hand to point, and the cohort slows behind him. Everything that happens next depends on what the man in front does with the 2 words he has already decided to say. Watch what he does next, because it is the opposite of what every arrested man in history has ever done. John 18:4 uses a specific Greek participle, eidos, which means knowing fully with complete awareness. Jesus, therefore, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth. He did not wait to be dragged out of the trees. He did not let Judas reach him first with the staged kiss Matthew and Mark describe. John, writing decades later, skips the kiss entirely, because in his telling, Judas never gets the chance. Before the betrayer can complete the signal he has been rehearsing in his head all the way down from the city, the man he came for steps out of the shadow of the olive trees into the torchlight and speaks first. Whom do you seek? Tina zetaite. 2 words in Greek. A simple question. The kind of question a shopkeeper asks a customer who has wandered in by accident. And it stops the whole operation cold. Think about what has just happened from the cohort side. They have been briefed that this man is dangerous, that he has followers, that he might resist or flee, that the arrest could turn violent. They have moved in formation through the Kidron in the dark, weapons drawn, expecting to have to search, expecting to have to chase, expecting, at minimum, a moment of confusion before they find the right face. Instead, the face walks out to meet them, calm, unarmed, asking them, politely, who it is they are looking for. The tribune does not answer. The temple captains do not answer. Somewhere in the middle of the line, a voice, probably one of the hyperatai who actually knows what he looks like, calls back, Iesun ton Nazaraion, Jesus the Nazarene. John puts the title in deliberately, not Jesus son of Joseph, not Jesus of Galilee, Jesus the Nazarene, the name that was about to be nailed in 3 languages above a cross on a hill 6 hours from now. They are using the name of contempt, the name by which Pilate will mock him in the morning. And he answers them. He does not correct them. He does not explain. He does not plead. He opens his mouth and speaks 2 words in Greek. The 2 words this whole chapter has been circling since the first torch appeared on the ridge. And before we reach those 2 words in the next breath, understand what has already happened in this exchange. He asked them who they were seeking, and he got them to say his name out loud. He made the cohort identify its own target. He made the arresting force name the man it had come to kill. Origen, writing in Alexandria in the 3rd century, noticed this detail and would not let it go. No one takes this life. It is being handed over, and the one handing it over is the one being arrested. The question was not confusion. The question was consent being given out loud in front of 600 witnesses before anyone had laid a hand on him. The torches are close enough now to feel. The iron smell of oiled blades is in the air, and he inhales once, and says the words that are about to put them all on the ground. Ego eimi, 2 words. In English they land as I am, almost nothing, a grammatical placeholder, the kind of phrase a man uses to confirm his own name at a checkpoint. In the Greek of a first-century Jew who had ever heard the Torah read aloud in a synagogue, they landed like a detonation. Here is why. 300 years before this night, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek in Alexandria, the translation we call the Septuagint, the Bible most Jews in Jesus' world actually read, the translators came to a problem they could not solve cleanly. In Exodus 3:14, Moses is standing barefoot on Sinai, and a voice out of a bush that burns without being consumed tells him to go back to Egypt. Moses asks the name. The voice answers in Hebrew, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, I am that I am. Tell them I am has sent you. The Alexandrian translators rendered it into Greek with the phrase ego eimi ho on, I am the one who is. And from that moment forward, in the Greek-speaking Jewish mind, those 2 syllables, ego eimi, were not neutral. They were the sound the bush made. They were the name. And John, the former fisherman from Capernaum, who walked with this man for 3 years, knew exactly what he was writing. Count the times he uses it in his gospel. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. 7 declarations. 7 times a man standing in a Galilean street or a Judean courtyard takes the name of God from Sinai and places it on his own chest. 7 is not an accident in John's Gospel. It is the number of completion. And then in the garden, the 8th, spoken not into a debate or a sermon, but into the torchlight of an arresting force that has just named him out loud. He does not say, I am he. The he is not in the Greek. The Greek is bare. Ego eimi, I am. There is a particular kind of silence that can arrive at 3 in the morning when you are lying in the dark and the fear you have been managing all day finally arrives without interruption. The fear that what you believe might not hold, that the name you have been praying to might be just a word, that the whole architecture might be quieter than you need it to be. In that silence, 2 syllables from a garden 2,000 years ago are worth holding, because the men who came for him that night were not theologians. Most of them were Roman conscripts from Syria and Thrace who could not have cared less about Exodus. But the temple guard knew, the chief priest's servants knew, and what they heard was a Galilean carpenter, standing unarmed in front of 600 swords, take the unpronounceable name of the God of Sinai onto his own tongue and place it between himself and them like a wall of fire. Jerome, translating this verse into Latin in Bethlehem in the late 4th century, chose ego sum and refused to soften it. What happened next was not metaphor. It was physics meeting theology in a grove of olive trees, and the grove was not built to hold the weight. John records it in a single verb. Apelthon eis ta opiso kai epesan chamai. They drew back and fell to the ground, all of them. The Greek is not describing a stumble or a nervous step back. The verb epesan is the same verb used when a man drops dead in battle. The tribune in his polished cuirass, the young conscripts from Syria, the temple officers with their staves, the servants of Annas and Caiaphas, the lantern-bearers, every one of them collapses backward into the grass and the olive leaves and the cold stones of Gethsemane. The torches do not go out. You can hear them still hissing, oil-soaked cloth against damp air. But the men holding them are on their backs. And here is where John does something that no honest reader can get past without feeling it. He does not say Jesus stood over them in triumph. He does not say the 11 rushed forward to finish what began. He records instead that Jesus asked the question again. Verse 7. Palin un eperotesen autus. Again, therefore, he asked them, Whom do you seek? The same question, word for word. And they, lifting themselves off the ground, shaking, robes twisted, weapons half dropped in the grass, answer him again. Jesus the Nazarene. The same answer. Nothing has changed in their words. Everything has changed in what those words now weigh. Think about what is happening here. He has just shown them, in the most physical way possible, in a way their bodies will remember for the rest of their lives, who he is. He has let the name of Sinai speak itself through his own throat and put 600 trained men flat on the earth. And then he lets them stand back up. He does not hold them there. He does not keep them pinned. He gives them their feet, their balance, their weapons, and asks the question a second time, as if the first round had never happened, as if he were offering them the chance to give a different answer. They do not give a different answer. Augustine, preaching in Hippo at the turn of the 5th century, saw something terrifying in this symmetry. The first ego eimi was revelation, the second round was invitation. He showed them what he was, and then he let them choose what to do with what they had seen. And they chose to finish the arrest. There is someone listening right now who has been in exactly this moment. You have had a thing happen that you cannot explain away. A moment where the floor of your ordinary life gave out for an instant and something more real came through. And then life stood you back up, handed you your phone and your schedule, and asked you what you wanted to do next. And you went back to what you were already doing. That is not weakness. That is what free will looks like from the inside. It is terrifying how gentle it is. And then in verse 8, before they can move toward him, he speaks one more sentence. I told you that I am. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. Let these go, pointing at the 11. The shepherd between his sheep and the swords, making the terms of his own arrest. He is not being taken. He is negotiating. And the cohort, still brushing grass from their armor, accepts the terms without arguing, because whatever just happened, they know better now than to push him. And into that agreement, into the fragile pause where the tribune has just accepted the terms laid down by the man he came to arrest, a sword comes out. Peter's. John names him in verse 10. Simon un Petros echon machairan. Simon Peter, having a sword. The other three Gospels describe the same moment and leave the swordsman anonymous. One of them that stood by, a certain one. John alone writes the name, and John alone names the man who lost his ear, Malchus, a servant of the high priest, not a soldier, not a centurion, a household slave, probably Judean, standing near the front because someone had to carry the high priest's lantern. Why does John give us both names when the others would not? Because John was there. He was the disciple who knew the high priest's household by sight. Chapter 18, verse 15, tells us that directly, and he knew Malchus personally, by name, the way you know the face of the man who opens the gate for your employer. These are not generic figures to him. These are a friend and a neighbor servant, suddenly and horribly tangled in the same second. A machaira is not a dagger. It is a short, curved blade, something between a long knife and a cavalry sword, the kind a Galilean fisherman might carry at Passover when the roads were full of bandits. Peter swings it, in the torchlight, aiming for a head and missing, because men swinging swords in panic almost always miss what they are aiming at, and the edge catches Malchus on the right side of the face and takes the ear off clean. Luke, who was a physician, preserves the detail that it was specifically the right ear. Blood runs hot and fast down the side of the man's neck, soaking into his tunic. The smell of it rises into the oil smoke of the lanterns. For one heartbeat, the whole scene teeters toward massacre. 600 armed men and one servant bleeding in the grass is all the excuse the tribune needs. And then Jesus moves. He is the one being arrested. His hands are about to be bound, and he reaches out and touches the side of Malchus's head, and the ear is whole again. Luke 22:51 records it. The last miracle before the cross. Not a sermon, not a raising of the dead, a quiet, unasked act of mercy, performed on a man who came to drag him to his execution. Nobody stops him, nobody intervenes. Whatever authority he carried a moment ago when the cohort was on the ground is still there in his fingertips. And then, turning to the fisherman still holding the bloody blade, he says the sentence that closes the argument. "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" The sword goes back, slowly. Peter's hands are shaking. Matthew adds that Jesus also told him 12 legions of angels were available for the asking. He did not ask. The man who just healed his enemy with one touch is telling his friend to stop defending him, because the defense is the refusal of the gift. The grove is quiet again. Malchus lifts a hand to his own ear, finds it intact, and does not know what to do with his face. The ropes come out. Step back for a moment from the grove and ask a harder question. Why is John the only one who tells us the cohort went down? Matthew writes his gospel within 25 years of the arrest, probably for Jewish believers in Antioch or Palestine. Mark writes earlier, likely in Rome, for a mostly Gentile audience drawn from Peter's own preaching. Luke compiles his careful, orderly account for a Roman named Theophilus, cross-checking sources, interviewing witnesses. 3 Gospels, 3 different audiences, 3 different angles on the same night, and not one of them mentions that every man who came to Gethsemane ended up on his back. John writes last. Somewhere around the year 90, nearly 6 decades after the olive press stopped dripping that Passover night. By then, the old fisherman is living in Ephesus, a coastal city in what is now western Turkey, surrounded by Greek-speaking believers and a rising generation that never saw any of it. Jewish communities in the region are wrestling over whether Jesus could have been the Messiah. Greek converts are wrestling over whether he was really a man or only seemed to be one. A movement called docetism, from the Greek dokio, to seem, is already insisting that Jesus only appeared to suffer, that divinity cannot actually be arrested, cannot actually bleed. And John, who saw the blood run down Malchus's neck and the name come out of the Lord's mouth in the same 5 minutes, sits down to write against both errors at once. That is why the falling is in his gospel and not in the others. Matthew, Mark, and Luke had already shown a human Jesus going willingly to his death. The earlier Gospels had already answered Rome and Antioch. What Ephesus needed, what the next generation of readers needed, was the other half of the picture. Proof that the man being bound in that grove was not being overpowered. Proof that the arrest was a surrender, not a capture. And John had seen it with his own eyes. He had been young enough that night to remember the sound a Roman helmet makes when it hits a stone, that flat iron clang, swallowed by wet grass. He had watched 600 trained men lift themselves out of the dirt of Gethsemane, and then, on his own terms, lay hands on the one who put them there. If you have ever felt that your belief is being asked to hold more than it can carry, that the version of Jesus people keep handing you is either too human to save or too divine to understand you, John wrote this verse for you. He is not reporting a prodigy. He is placing a pillar under a doctrine that has not even been named yet. Fully God, fully man. Both, at once, in a torchlit grove. Chrysostom, in one of his homilies on John preached in the late 4th century at Antioch, described this passage as the evangelist's quiet refusal to let anyone reduce the cross to tragedy. No one bleeds who cannot refuse to bleed. No one dies who cannot refuse to die. John wrote the falling down so that the generations who came after him would never make the mistake of pitying the man on the cross. And now, with the ropes on his wrists and the cohort finally moving him back across the Kidron, that mistake becomes the only one left to make. Follow the route now, in your mind, step by step. From the olive grove on the western slope, down into the bed of the Kidron, back up the steep path toward the city gate, across the Tirapoan valley to the palace of Annas. From there, a second walk to Caiaphas. Then, before dawn, down the long limestone stairs still visible today, to the praetorium where Pilate sleeps. Then across Jerusalem again to Herod. Then back to Pilate. Then the Via Dolorosa. Then Golgotha. Between Gethsemane and the cross, conservative estimates put the distance he covered that night and morning at somewhere between 4 and 5 miles on foot, with his hands bound, after no sleep, after what Luke 22:44 records as a sweat mingled with blood. Every one of those steps was a step he could have stopped. That is the unbearable thing about what just happened in the grove. The ego eimi did not prove his power in the abstract. It proved it in the specific. It established, in front of hundreds of eyewitnesses, that the word from his mouth could flatten an army. Which means that every door he walked through after that moment, he walked through with his own 2 feet, while carrying the ability to not walk through it. The hands were tied, but the tying was voluntary. The ropes were rope, not restraint. At any point between Kidron and Golgotha, while Annas questions him, while Caiaphas rages, while a servant girl accuses Peter by the charcoal fire, while Pilate washes his hands, while the soldiers press the thorns down, while the crossbeam is laid across shoulders already shredded, he could have said those 2 syllables again. He said them once. He could have said them twice. There is a specific weight that settles on you when you realize someone is staying in a situation they could walk out of. A parent holding vigil in a hospital chair 3 nights in a row when they could be anywhere else. A spouse who has every legal and moral right to leave and does not. A friend who keeps picking up the phone when every message is heavier than the last. The weight of that is different from the weight of obligation. It is the specific weight of chosen presence, and once you feel it, you cannot unfeel it. That is the weight of every step he took out of the garden. Not a victim being swept toward an ending, a man walking, slowly, hands bound by ropes he could have untied with a breath, toward the cup he was handed in an upper room a few hours earlier. Augustine wrote that the power which held him on the cross was not the nails, but the love. In the grove, the evidence became public. The nails were going to hold a man who did not need to be held. And that changes what every hammer blow means. Follow one of those soldiers now. Pick any one of the hundreds who went down in the grass. By noon the next day, Roman infantry from the same Jerusalem garrison are detailed to crucifixion duty on the hill outside the Geneth Gate. Mark 15:39 preserves what one of them said as the sky turned black and the man on the center cross exhaled for the last time. Truly this man was the Son of God. Aleithos houtos ho anthropos huios theou en. A centurion. Somewhere in his memory, less than 12 hours old, is the feel of wet olive leaves against the back of his neck in a grove across the Kidron. He had been on the ground once already that night. He got up. He finished the job. He stood at the foot of the cross and watched the man he had helped drag there die, and then he said out loud what the falling had already tried to tell him. Tradition, preserved by the 5th century writer Pseudo-Dionysius and cited in the Eastern Church, gave him a name, Longinus. Whether the name is accurate or legendary, the role is in the text. One of the men who came to arrest God ended the day confessing him. I told you at the start that 3 things would come loose. The first was the size of the force, a sparer of up to 600 men sent for one carpenter. And you now know why. Because nothing smaller could carry the weight of what he was about to say. The second was the 2 words themselves, ego eimi, the name from Exodus 3:14, the sound the bush made, placed by a Galilean on his own chest in front of an army. The third was the question nobody wants to ask. If he could put them down, why did he let them stand up? Because the ropes were consent. Because the nails would hold a man who did not need to be held. Because Longinus, or whatever his real name was, had to be given the chance to see, and fall, and rise, and choose. As for the others, Judas walked back across the Kidron with his silver, and by morning would hang himself in a field outside the city. Malchus, the servant whose ear returned to the side of his own head, disappears from Scripture. Early Christian tradition in Antioch remembered his name because it remembered his face among the believers. Peter wept in a courtyard before the rooster finished crowing, denied 3 times, and 30 years later died on a cross of his own in Rome, head down by his own request, because he had finally understood what the sword was for, and what it was not. The tribune who led the cohort is never named again. Somewhere in that formation, a centurion spoke the truth. There is someone listening who has been carrying a prayer so long they almost do not say it anymore. A prayer for a child, a marriage, a body, a mind. You have heard, between the ribs, the silence that comes after you stop expecting the answer. There is someone else sitting with a grief that the calendar was supposed to ease, and it has not. There is a person whose phone keeps lighting up with a name they used to love, and the relationship looks finished from every angle. There is someone, right now, at an hour too late to call anyone, replaying the fear that what they believe might be thinner than they need it to be. And there is someone showing up, to the building, to the routine, to the words, with nothing behind them but muscle memory. All 5 of you. Hear this. The garden answers one specific question, not whether he has the power to stop what is happening to you. The garden already settled that. He flattened an army with 2 syllables and let them stand. The question it answers is whether the staying is chosen. Every hammer blow on Golgotha is an answer. Every step from Kidron to cross is an answer. He is not trapped in your situation with you by accident. He walked into it with his hands already free, and he is still here. The next time the prayer feels empty, or the grief does not move, or the clock says 3 and the fear has a face, you will know what to do with the silence. It is not absence. It is a man who has not untied the ropes. Let us pray. Father, we thank you for the 2 words in the grove. We admit we have read them 100 times and heard nothing. We admit there are nights when we need the cohort on the ground more than we need any sermon. Nights when we need to know the name still has weight. Teach us to hear ego eimi in the rooms you have not left. Teach us to trust the staying. Where we are carrying a prayer you have not yet answered, hold us there with you, the way you held the nails. We are not asking you to walk away. We are asking to stop mistaking your presence for your absence. In the name of the one who could have spoken twice and chose to speak only once. Amen. Before you go, which moment stopped you? The verb John chose for what the soldiers did in the grass, the same verb used when a man drops dead in battle. The single touch that put Malchus's ear back, or the centurion at Golgotha, saying out loud what his own body had learned the night before. Tell me in the comments which one you are still thinking about. Next, we stay in the same chapter and follow Peter to the charcoal fire. The specific Greek word John uses for that fire, and why it is the same word he uses again by the Sea of Galilee when Peter is asked 3 questions he does not want to answer.